60 coffee beans. Not 59, not 61, exactly 60, counted by hand, one by one, every single morning, by a man who was going deaf. Beethoven couldn't hear the world, but he could count his coffee beans, and in that tiny, absurd, almost pathetic act, he held on to the one thing that was slipping away from him in every other direction: control over a life that was coming apart. This is not a story about coffee. This is a story about what we do when everything else fails. This is a story about rituals. There's a word we misuse constantly. We say ritual and we picture candles, incense, robes, something that happens far away from us, in temples we've never visited, in languages we don't speak. But a ritual isn't that. A ritual is something much closer, much more ordinary, much more yours than you realize. A ritual is any sequence of actions you repeat with intention. That's it. But that's it contains a universe, because the difference between a habit and a ritual is the difference between breathing and meditating. Both use the lungs, but one you do without noticing, and the other you do knowing you're doing it. And that knowing changes everything. Think about it for a moment. How many things do you do each day without realizing you're doing them? You get up, brush your teeth, check your phone, make something to eat, all on autopilot, all without presence. The day happens to you. You don't happen to the day. Now imagine something different. Imagine that one of those things, just one, you do with intention. Not faster, not better, not differently. Just with attention. Just knowing that you're doing it. That, exactly that, is a ritual. And that, exactly that, can change an entire life. Let me tell you something anthropologists have known for a long time and the rest of us have forgotten. Human history is, in large part, a history of rituals. The paintings in the caves at Lascaux, those images of bison and horses that have been sitting in the dark for 17,000 years, weren't decoration. They were part of ceremonies tied to the hunt. Neanderthals buried their dead with flowers more than 60,000 years ago. 60,000! That means the need to ritualize experience predates our own species. It's not something we invented. It's something we are. In Egypt, the act of waking was an echo of the sun god's own awakening. In Rome, every family kept a small altar where the father burned incense each morning before the guardian spirits of the household. It wasn't superstition. It was anchoring. It was a way of saying, I am here. My ancestors were here. This continues. And then came modernity. Instrumental reason, efficiency, the factories. And little by little, the way someone bleeds without noticing, we were stripped of our rituals. Secularization didn't eliminate the need to ritualize. It simply left a void we still don't know how to fill. Look around you. The morning routines of tech executives, the meditation apps, the journaling culture, the self-care movements. All of it, if you look closely, is a desperate and entirely legitimate attempt to reintroduce ritual into lives that were emptied of it. We aren't inventing anything new. We're remembering something ancient. And now science confirms what intuition always knew. Your brain is, fundamentally, a prediction machine. It builds models of the world and anticipates what's coming. Rituals feed that mechanism with extraordinary efficiency. When you perform a ritual, something rare and valuable happens inside your head. The basal ganglia, the region of automaticity, and the prefrontal cortex, the seat of conscious attention, activate simultaneously. That co-activation produces a state we might call conscious automaticity. The mental load drops, but presence remains. It's like driving a route you know by heart, but looking at the landscape as if it were the first time. And here's where it gets fascinating. Research has shown that ritualized sequences trigger dopamine release not only upon completion, but upon initiation. Your brain learns to anticipate the reward of the full ritual from the very first gesture. That's why the simple act of setting up for meditation, lighting the incense, adjusting the cushion, already produces a calming effect. Your brain is already releasing the neurotransmitters associated with the complete practice before the practice has begun. The ritual works before it works. What's more, rituals have been documented to reduce anxiety in high-stress situations, not because they eliminate the threat, but because they restore something stress destroys: the feeling of personal agency. And it works even when you don't believe in it. Researchers at Harvard demonstrated that rituals improve performance across tasks ranging from singing in public to solving math problems. And the crucial finding was that they work even in skeptics. It's not faith that matters, it's structure. Let me say that again, because it's worth hearing twice. It's not faith that matters, it's structure. There's a watchmaker in Istanbul who understands this better than any neuroscientist. His name is Omar al-Khatib, and for decades he opened his shop in the ancient souk of Aleppo, Syria, every morning at 7 sharp. First, he turned on the light. Then he inspected the watches under repair, one by one. Finally, he set the time on the wall clock his grandfather had brought from Geneva in 1923. A pendulum clock with Roman numerals and a walnut case that smelled like history. When the Civil War began, Omar kept the ritual. When the bombings shook Aleppo, Omar kept the ritual. When the city split in two, with the souk on the front line, Omar walked each morning through streets that had fewer buildings and more rubble, opened his shop, inspected the watches, set the time on his grandfather's clock. The neighbors thought he was either a madman or a saint. "Why repair watches if we don't know whether we'll live until tomorrow?" Omar would answer. "Precisely because we don't know whether we'll live until tomorrow, we need to know what time it is." One day, a missile hit the souk directly. Omar found his shop destroyed. The roof collapsed. The watches, a mangled heap of glass and metal. But his grandfather's clock, inexplicably, was still running. The case splintered, the crystal shattered, the pendulum bent. But the mechanism kept marking time with the Swiss precision of 1923. When they evacuated Aleppo, Omar took 3 things: his tools, a photograph of his father, and the clock. On the bus, surrounded by shattered families, he held it against his chest the way you hold a person. Today, in a small apartment in Istanbul, Omar repairs watches for the Syrian community in exile. And every morning at 7, he sets the time on his grandfather's clock. The pendulum is still bent, the crystal is still broken, but the time keeps moving. When everything collapses, ritual is the last thing left standing. Not because it's invulnerable, but because it's portable. It fits in your hands. It fits in your memory. It fits in any place where someone is willing to repeat a gesture with intention. But you don't need a war to need a ritual. Sometimes an ordinary loss is enough. Sometimes a rainy Tuesday will do. In Buenos Aires, a retired professor named Ernesto lost his wife after 41 years of marriage, and he stopped doing everything. He stopped cooking, he stopped reading, he stopped going outside. He ate crackers with cheese and watched television on mute. One rainy day, walking without an umbrella or a purpose, he wandered into a used bookshop and bought a notebook with blue covers. That night, without knowing why, he wrote a single sentence. Today Lucia would have said, "I'm a complete disaster." And he smiled, for the first time in months. The next day he wrote another sentence. The day after, another. Without meaning to, he had created a ritual. Every night before sleep, one sentence. Just one. Sometimes it was sad. Today I woke up and reached for her side of the bed. Sometimes it was funny. The grocer told me I look like I need more vegetables and less sadness. Sometimes it was simply a record. It rained all day today. And something began to change. Not the circumstances, the attention. Ernesto noticed that during the day he paid more attention to what was happening, because he knew that at night he'd have to choose a sentence. The nighttime writing ritual was transforming the quality of his daytime attention. He started seeing things he hadn't seen before. The exact color of the sky at 6 in the evening, the way pigeons arranged themselves on the wires like notes on a staff. When his granddaughter asked what he was writing in those notebooks, Ernesto answered, "I'm telling the day what I noticed about it." The smallest ritual, one sentence before bed, can be the thread that keeps us stitched to the world when everything else has come undone. Now let's talk about something uncomfortable. Where does a healthy ritual end and a compulsion begin? Because the boundary is real and it's blurrier than we'd like to admit. Obsessive-compulsive disorder is characterized precisely by the compulsive execution of rituals. Washing your hands 40 times, checking whether the door is locked again and again and again. The clinical difference is function. A healthy ritual reduces anxiety and generates well-being. A compulsive ritual tries to control an anxiety that, paradoxically, grows with each repetition. One liberates, the other chains. But there are other tensions. Cultural appropriation. When an executive practices a decontextualized ancestral purification ritual, is he honoring a tradition or hollowing it out? The question is legitimate, and it doesn't have an easy answer. Commercialization. Meditation turned into a subscription app, journaling packaged as a premium kit, ritual bathing rebranded as a spa experience. Does the wellness industry democratize access to rituals, or does it strip them of their soul? And the skeptic's question, does writing intentions on paper every new moon actually do anything? The neuroscience answer is nuanced and, to my mind, beautiful. The ritual works not because there's a mystical connection between the moon and your intentions, but because the act of ritualizing the intention consolidates it neurologically. It makes it more salient, more likely to be remembered and acted upon. The ritual doesn't need magic to be magical. There's a neurosurgeon in Madrid who learned this the hardest way possible. Dr. Carmen Villarreal had a ritual everyone in the hospital knew about. Before every surgery, she pulled a €1 coin from her pocket, always the same one, worn smooth by years, and spun it on the table. If it landed heads, she put it in her left pocket. If it landed tails, she put it in her left pocket. The result didn't matter. The coin always ended up in the same place. The residents would ask her why. Carmen would smile. "I don't flip the coin to know what will happen. I flip it to remember that I don't know what will happen." The coin had been her father's, a carpenter who died on the operating table during a routine surgery. The surgeon was competent, experienced, perhaps too confident. The complication that killed him was rare, but well documented, and protocol called for a precaution the surgeon skipped. 1,000 uneventful surgeries had eroded his vigilance. Carmen swore she would never operate on autopilot. The coin was her alarm against complacency. For 18 years it worked. Until an ordinary Tuesday, operating on a 6-year-old girl, a massive hemorrhage flooded the surgical field. Carmen worked with everything she knew. The girl died on the table. Reviews determined the death was unavoidable. There was no medical error. Her colleagues absolved her. But Carmen couldn't forgive the coin. She stopped flipping it. And without it, she operated with a rigidity that wasn't concentration. It was fear. It was a veteran nurse who intervened. "Carmen," she said, "the coin never promised you that everything would turn out well. It promised you that you'd be present. And you were present. Valentina needed that, even though it wasn't enough." Carmen flipped the coin again the next day. but it no longer meant the same thing. Before, it meant, I'm prepared for the unexpected. Now it meant something darker and more true. I'm prepared for the unexpected, including the possibility of failing despite being prepared. Rituals protect us, but they don't make us invulnerable. And when a ritual reaches its limit, it's not the ritual that has failed. It's our expectation that anything can eliminate the risk of being alive. Let's shift the tone. Let's talk about coffee. 3 cups of coffee, to be exact. In Mexico City, a graphic designer named Sofia faced a problem that might sound familiar: working from home without structure. She worked at 2 in the morning. She slept at 4 in the afternoon. The days bled into each other like wet watercolors. The solution arrived by accident. One Monday, she realized she only had enough coffee left for 3 cups. She decided to ration them: the first to wake up, the second to work, the third to close the day. Without meaning to, she had built an invisible architecture. The first cup she drinks on the balcony, without her phone, watching the street. 15 minutes where she isn't the designer, or the freelancer, or the responsible adult. Just someone drinking coffee and watching life go by. The second cup marks the start of work. She pours it into a cobalt blue mug she bought in Oaxaca and places it to the left of her keyboard. When the cup is in position, her brain understands that it's time. No willpower required. The ritual has automated the transition. The third cup is sacred. At 6 in the evening, regardless of whether the work is done. She drinks it on the couch, not at the desk. It means this far and no further. Her partner learned the rules quickly. During the first cup, no logistics talk. During the second, no interruptions. The third is shareable, but only if there's a fourth available, because Sophia never surrenders the third. When she went through a relationship crisis and spent 2 weeks in tears, the 3 cups were the only thing she held on to. And here's the most subtle lesson of all. Sophia didn't add anything to her life. She already drank coffee. She simply invested intention into what had been automatic. The difference between a habit and a ritual is the difference between drinking coffee and making coffee mean something. Now I want to take you somewhere unexpected, into a cockpit. Commercial aviation has turned ritualization into a science of survival. Every flight is preceded by checklists, briefings, inspections that must be performed the same way, in the same order, regardless of the pilot's experience or the conditions of the day. These rituals were formalized after a disaster. In 1935, an experienced pilot crashed a plane during a demonstration because he forgot to unlock the flight controls, a supposedly obvious procedure. The result was the first flight checklist, a ritual that separated safety from individual judgment. And here's what aviation teaches us about life. Even pilots who consider the checklist unnecessary catch errors while performing it on roughly 1% of flights. In an industry with millions of flights per year, that 1% represents thousands of potential catastrophes averted. In any domain of your life where the stakes are high and the complexity is great, parenting, health, finances, relationships, ritualizing critical procedures drastically reduces error. Not because it makes you perfect, but because it makes you present. Viktor Frankl survived Auschwitz, and he observed something no statistic can fully capture. Prisoners who maintained some form of ritual, praying, singing internally, telling stories, preserving some ritualized form of hygiene, had a measurably better chance of survival. Not because the ritual protected them physically, but because it gave them something the camp was designed to destroy above all else: meaning. Frankl wrote that a human being can endure any suffering if they find meaning in it, and rituals are, perhaps, the most concrete and accessible way to manufacture meaning. Think about it. To repeat a gesture with intention every day is an act of faith. Not religious faith necessarily, faith that tomorrow is worth showing up for. faith that there is something worth repeating, faith that the process matters more than the outcome. Frankl called it tragic optimism, the ability to sustain hope not because things are going well, but in spite of things going badly. And that is exactly what a ritual does. Every time you light the same candle, every time you open the same notebook, every time you sit in the same place, you are saying, without words, with your body, that tomorrow matters. I want to tell you about a grandmother in the mountains of Oaxaca. Doña Remedios Vasquez swept the entrance of her house every dawn. It wasn't cleaning, it was a philosophical declaration. She swept with a palm broom she made herself, always left to right, starting at the door and ending where her land met the road. She swept leaves, dust, stones, dead insects, and, according to her, the bad intentions the night leaves at the door. Her granddaughter, Marisol, who was studying business administration in the capital, told her, "Abuela, why do you sweep every morning if the dust comes back in half an hour? It's literally a pointless act." Doña Remedios answered without stopping, "Mijita, breathing is also an act you have to repeat every second, and you don't call that pointless." When the doctor told her she had diabetes, she replied, "My diet is my tortillas and my chocolate. If diabetes wants to live with me, it's going to have to get used to it." One day she fell and fractured her hip. The doctors said she would never walk again. Her grandchildren assumed the sweeping was over. They took turns sweeping for her. Doña Remedios watched them from her wheelchair. "That's not how you do it. Don't start from the right. Don't sweep inward. Bad intentions need to be pushed out, not pulled in." Against all odds, she walked again. Not well, not fast, not without pain, but enough to brace herself against the broom and sweep every dawn. The orthopedic surgeon called it a miracle. Doña Remedios said it was the broom. Today, when Marisol visits the village, she wakes up early and sweeps alongside her grandmother. They don't talk. They sweep together while the sun rises over the mountains, and the day, once again, knows that someone is waiting for it. The deepest irony of rituals is that their practical uselessness is precisely their existential usefulness. Sweeping while knowing the dust will return. Praying while knowing you control nothing. Loving while knowing you'll lose. All of them are acts of faith in the process over the result.
Hay un hilo invisible que conecta a Beethoven contando granos de café con Gandhi hilando algodón en una rueca, que conecta a Frida Kahlo pintándose frente al espejo, con Maya Angelou escribiendo en un cuarto vacío, que conecta a un relojero en Aleppo con una abuela en Oaxaca, que conecta a una cirujana con su moneda y a un viudo con su cuaderno azul. Ese hilo es la necesidad humana de darle forma al tiempo, porque el tiempo, sin rituales, es un fluido amorfo. Los días se parecen demasiado entre sí, las semanas se confunden, los años se evaporan, y un día despiertas y no sabes cómo llegaste hasta aquí, porque no hay marcas en el camino. Los rituales son esas marcas, son la puntuación del texto de tu vida. Sin ellos, la vida es un párrafo interminable sin comas, sin puntos, sin pausas para respirar. Gandhi lo entendió cuando empezó a hilar cada día en su rueca. El gesto parecía absurdo. El líder de un movimiento de millones de personas dedicando horas a producir hilo artesanalmente. Pero cada giro de la rueca era simultáneamente un acto de resistencia política y un acto de meditación. El movimiento rítmico producía un estado de calma concentrada que Gandhi usaba para pensar, planificar, conectar con su centro. Y luego hizo algo brillante. Convirtió su ritual personal en un movimiento colectivo. Pidió a todos los indios que hilaran su propia tela. Millones de personas ejecutando el mismo ritual. Cada hogar con una rueca era un nodo de resistencia silenciosa. La rueca terminó en la bandera de la India. Gandhi hiló la mañana del día en que fue asesinado. Fue la última actividad productiva de su vida. Piensa en eso. En tu último día, ¿qué ritual querrías haber mantenido? Frida Kahlo encontró el suyo en un espejo. Después del accidente de tranvía que le fracturó la columna, la pelvis, las costillas y el pie, Frida quedó postrada con un corsé de yeso. Su madre instaló un espejo en el dosel de la cama y le dio pinturas. Cada día, Frida se miraba y pintaba lo que veía. No la realidad fotográfica, la realidad emocional. Más de 50 de sus 143 pinturas son autorretratos. Cada uno era un acto ritual de negociación con el dolor. No se miraba para encontrarse bonita, se miraba para encontrarse verdadera. Cuando pintó la columna rota, su torso abierto revelando una columna jónica fracturada, el cuerpo claveteado de clavos, lágrimas corriendo por un rostro que mira directamente al espejo, la expresión no es de víctima, es de desafío sereno. Es la cara de alguien que ha convertido la herida en fuente. El ritual del espejo convierte el dolor en pigmento, la limitación en tema, la herida en arte. No porque niegue el sufrimiento, porque lo mira de frente. Maya Angelou lo hacía diferente. Su ritual era el vacío. Cada mañana, a las 6:30, se dirigía a una habitación de hotel alquilada expresamente para escribir. Sin cuadros, sin decoración, sin distracciones. Llevaba una Biblia, un diccionario, una baraja de cartas y un bloc de papel amarillo. Angelou creció en un sur segregado donde la voz de una niña negra no tenía valor. A los 7 años fue violada. Cuando lo confesó, el hombre fue asesinado. La niña dejó de hablar durante 5 años, convencida de que su voz era un arma letal. El cuarto vacío era su forma de proteger esa voz recuperada. El espacio despojado eliminaba todo lo que pudiera contaminar la escritura. Las cartas eran el permiso para no producir, un reconocimiento de que la creatividad no puede ser forzada, solo invitada. De esas mañanas austeras surgieron las obras que transformaron la literatura estadounidense. El ritual no era un lujo de artista. Era la condición mínima para que la voz interior pudiera ser escuchada. Y esa voz la tenemos todos. Solo que el ruido del mundo la ahoga constantemente. Un ritual es, a veces, lo único que la protege.
The pandemic reminded us of this in the most brutal way. Millions of people died without their families being able to do what every human culture has considered essential: say goodbye through ritual. No wakes, no embraces, no collective funerals. And in the face of that void, improvised rituals emerged with a creativity that breaks the heart. In Italy, neighbors sang from their balconies. In New York, residents applauded every night at 7. In Mexico, families created adapted altars for the dead, with photographs of COVID victims beside the copal and marigolds. An Italian-Argentine family, unable to gather in person, created a ritual where each member cooked the same recipe from their late grandmother at the same hour, across different time zones, and shared the meal over video call. Psychologists documented that those who managed to create alternative morning rituals showed significantly better grief resolution than those who simply waited. The ritual didn't require orthodoxy. It required intention. And one study found that the inability to perform farewell rituals was the strongest predictor of complicated grief, above even the relationship with the deceased or the circumstances of the death. When the established rituals were taken away, people spontaneously created new ones. Because ritual is not a convention. It's an impulse. It's something we are. And what happens when ritual meets the modern world? The digital life, the speed that never lets up. There's a gap in the literature here, and it's one you can explore in your own life. Can digital rituals fulfill the same functions as analog ones? Can the screen be a ritual space, or is it inherently anti-ritual? There's evidence suggesting something interesting. In a study where parents of children with cancer wrote 3 things they were grateful for each night, those who wrote on paper showed greater benefits than those who used an app. The motor and tactile component, the pen, the paper, the handwriting, isn't an incidental detail. It's an active ingredient. The body remembers what the mind forgets, and the most potent rituals are the ones that involve the body. Not just thoughts, gestures, movement, contact with specific objects, lighting a candle, brewing tea in a particular pot, sitting in a specific place. Bessel van der Kolk, one of the world's foremost experts on trauma, puts it with a clarity that leaves no room for argument. Trauma is stored in the body, and the most effective therapies are the ones that engage the body. Yoga, rhythmic movement, patterned breathing, all forms of somatic ritual. Writing in a journal has value, but if the body remains clenched, the healing is only partial. The most transformative rituals are the ones that integrate mind and body into a unified practice. So how do you build a ritual that works? You don't need a manual hundreds of pages long. You need 4 things. Repetition with intention. The ritual must be performed regularly and with awareness. Without repetition, there is no ritual. Without intention, there is only habit. A bodily anchor. It must involve the body in some way. A gesture, a movement, a sensory contact. Purely mental rituals are more fragile than those with a physical component. A minimal beginning. It must be possible to start with an effort that feels almost absurd. 2 minutes, 1 sentence, a single gesture. Ambitious rituals fail. Humble rituals endure. A zone of meaning. It must connect to something that matters to you, a value, an identity, a purpose. Without meaning, it's just another routine. With meaning, the routine becomes a ritual. It doesn't need to be spiritual. It doesn't need to be ancestral. It doesn't need to be complex or expensive. It needs to be deliberate, embodied, accessible, and meaningful. That's it. And that's everything. There's something James Clear, the writer who has studied the mechanics of habits more closely than almost anyone, describes with a metaphor I find indispensable: the valley of disappointment. The results of rituals are not linear, they're exponential. For weeks or months, it seems like nothing is happening. Absolutely nothing. You write every night, and you still feel the same. You meditate every morning, and the mental noise doesn't diminish. You walk every afternoon, and the clarity doesn't arrive. And then, all at once, the change becomes visible. Like Japanese bamboo, which spends years building roots underground, with nothing appearing on the surface, and one day it breaks through and grows meters in weeks. Most people abandon their rituals in the valley, just before the exponential curve, just before the investment yields returns. If you are in the valley right now with some ritual you've started, I want you to hear this. The fact that you can't see results doesn't mean they aren't happening. It means they're happening beneath the surface, where you can't see them yet. Keep going. I want to end with something that Benjamin Franklin, with all his brilliance, never managed to do. Franklin maintained for decades a weekly self-evaluation ritual organized around 13 virtues. Each week he focused on one, marking every failure. 4 cycles per year. He did it with the discipline that made him one of the most extraordinary human beings in history. But he never mastered the 13th virtue, humility. He joked that even if he achieved it, he'd probably be proud of the accomplishment. And in that joke lives the most important truth about rituals. They don't need to work perfectly to be profoundly valuable. A ritual is not a tool for perfection. It is a tool for attention. You don't sweep so the floor stays clean forever. You sweep so the dawn knows someone is waiting for it. You don't count 60 coffee beans because the coffee demands it. You count them because you need a small island of order in a sea of chaos. You don't flip a coin to predict the future. You flip it to remember that the future is unpredictable. You don't write 1 sentence each night to produce literature. You write it to tell the day that it existed and that you existed with it. If anything you've heard today resonated with you, I want you to consider one thing, just one. Tomorrow, when you wake up, choose a moment, any moment, whichever one you like, and do it with intention. Not differently, not better, just with presence, knowing that you're doing it, feeling that you're doing it. It could be making the coffee. It could be looking out the window. It could be the first step you take when you leave the bed. Anything. Do it tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Not because it will change your life overnight, but because, gesture by gesture, day by day, presence by presence, you will be building something that no external circumstance can take from you. The quiet certainty that you are here, that time matters, that the smallest act, performed with love and with intention, can be the thing that keeps you stitched to the world when everything else threatens to come apart. Beethoven's 60 Beans, Carmen's coin, Ernesto's notebook, Sophia's 3 cups, Doña Remedios's broom, Omar's clock. None of them changed the world, but every single one of them changed themselves. And that, in the end, is the only thing that was ever in their hands, as it is in yours, right now.